I just want to say thank you to everyone for allowing me to come back and spend some time with all of you. And I just want to be able to introduce myself in my language and also to those that may be related to me. Yad bine to heglini nishlan since a kadni bashichin, Peter cheatney dashado, Twitch eatney dashanella. Taha done Asia wonder ado Beldil desnil Shawanalto. D.A. Asa Diné Nation. My name is Rose Whitehair, Rose Dashijine, Rosalita Marie Whitehair Yanishia. That is my name, and Rose is what they call me. My clans are Water Flows Together, and my other clan is Tsinsakadni, which represents a tree, a certain type of tree that grows here. And then also Kitlichitnis, which is a Red House clan, and are on my maternal grandmother's side. And then also on my paternal grandmother's side is Twitapitni, so Bitterwater clan. And I live in Window Rock, Arizona, on the Navajo Nation, and currently I'm working out of Albuquerque, New Mexico, which is approximately 200 miles east of Window Rock. And currently what I'm doing right now is I'm helping a number of different nations and states and cities and counties with their COVID response right now. It's been quite a challenge to see all the various differences between even just technology alone, and definitely a challenge. So what I'm going to be going through right now is just mainly showing a lot of pictures. I know that this was garnered towards our youth. And so the main thing is just sharing the stories, and then also question and answer sessions for basically this whole presentation that I have. So if you have any questions, if you guys want to ask anything specific for COVID response, we've definitely had some challenges along the way. So next slide, please. So one of the things that I think that people have a tendency to think that our desert people don't get water, and that we don't get flooding. We do have a number of monsoons that happen during August. Well, I'd say now our monsoon seasons are much longer than what they used to be. They used to last from July into September, but now we're seeing them as far into some rainy seasons that happen as early as March. I mean, as early as May into late October. And you will see here that this Hogan, it had flooded in Chinle, Arizona. We were impacted 3 times within 3 months. And you can see the little one that's exhausted on top of the Hogan. This was in Chinle, Arizona. And the main reason why I'm showing a lot of these photos, and it's mainly photos that I'm sharing, is that we have a tendency to think that it doesn't rain, it doesn't snow in the desert. And then not only that, but we have a number of traditional people that live in our community still that are forgotten, basically. And the main thing is knowing where these people live that are impacted in certain areas. And then also how the main question is, how do we bring help to these community members? I think that's the hardest thing that all of us have to deal with, is how do you get help to these most remote community members and remote areas that have a tendency to be overlooked. Next slide, please. This was flooding, the same flooding that you saw in the first picture on another area of the Navajo Nation, the eastern side of New Mexico. There was the same thing that was happening. The photo on the left is flooding that had happened on the eastern side. And this was on a Friday afternoon. You'll see these kids with their backpacks on. They had to find a way across that 8-foot drop to be able to get home. You'll see there that our community members, there's a little grandma that's standing behind the truck, and she's the main one that gathered all of the community members together, to her family members together, to bring home the kids or find a way to get the kids over that wash to get them home. This was a monsoon disaster, and the kids, you could see that they had to be walked across that deep ditch. One of the things that's most challenging is, and I think almost all of us have this frustration, is that FEMA or these emergency management codes and standard operating procedures normally say be able to have preparedness, rations, food, gas, electricity, wood for your community members or for your families for up to 3 days. And a lot of us that are in Indigenous communities, we know that that's just not the case. Either help isn't going to come, sadly, or we have to look at our own community members to be able to figure out what are we going to do on our own, because help usually never arrives from the federal agencies. And that is just something that we as tribal and Indigenous nations, we just know this for a fact. Sometimes help never arrives, and it's up to us to have to figure out what are we going to do on our own. So even though we here have rations for up to 3 days, like we said, it's usually up to us that have to be able to come to our own resources, figure out what we're going to do on our own, because it's sadly something that we have to deal with. On the right-hand side of the screen is Asayat Lake wildfire. It's interesting, this photo. The reason why I like to share this photo is that that little house on the right, you see the log home. The whole entire forest in that area was devastated, completely wiped out. But for some reason, I don't know if it was their prayers or their ancestors, I'm not sure exactly what it was, but that house was spared. It's amazing. All of us were fascinated by that, because that house, it was, everything around it was burned. And it wasn't just only the defensible space that was around it, but it was also, like I said, there was just so many places that have been 14,000 acres that were burned in this community, and a number of people that were impacted, but this house was one of the ones that was not. On the upper right-hand corner is the Gold King mine spill. We had a number of mines that were in the Colorado area that had toxins, barium, lead, arsenic that came down. And those were just a few of them that were actually tested for. But if you guys look up Gold King mine spill, there was a contractor that was working on that, on remediating a Gold King mine that was up in that area, and it broke, and we had over 3 million gallons of toxic waste that came into our waters. That itself is a whole different story. It was quite difficult to have to deal with that, because we had 20,000 people that were impacted. We had all of these communities that were along the northern part of the Navajo Nation. So what it was is it was up in Colorado, and it came down into New Mexico and all the way along Arizona, along 22 communities of the Navajo Nation. And the Navajo Nation is huge. It's bigger than Switzerland. They also say roughly the size of West Virginia. And so a lot of these communities had to deal with this poison that was coming through their communities. And we had to make sure that our livestock weren't impacted, horses, cattle, sheep, and those communities that drew their water from that San Juan River. Next slide, please. So the main thing that I'd like to share with everyone is that we opened up an emergency operations center, and we brought in youth from different communities. If you see on the far left-hand side of the screen, there's youth from our fire department that came in to help out. And also on the upper right-hand side of the screen, you can also see the see the two younger ladies that are helping out with FEMA. They were actually doing translating when we had some monsoonal impacts, flooding that happened in the community. And these ladies were using their GPS coordinates and using GIS, Geographic Information Systems mapping, and then also being able to go out there to those different community members that were impacted. And they were translating at the same time for some of the damage impacts that were happening. So you can see there that, like I said, technology is a key part of pulling together our efforts and also figuring out the different ways that we can use technology to be able to help our communities that don't have access to a lot of the stuff that we have. The picture at the bottom is our first tribal teen CERT class. Those are all the instructors that we taught for community emergency response teams. And those play a key role with all of our efforts. Next slide, please. So here you see all of the group photos. Those are all of the different trainings that we had, and we've had a number of them. This is just a couple of the different photos that I was able to pull. These are community members in like Mohawk, Akwesasne Mohawk areas, Gila River, Salt River, Tohono Nation, all of these different communities that had not only tribal emergency managers that were present, but also in Hawaii, we had some climate change and natural hazards presentations that we were able to give. We also had different community members where we had hazardous materials training, and then also response to explosives. The sandbag training is another one. And then also on the very far left corner, you'll see our Emergency Operations Center when we had everything up and running for flooding impacts that had happened. So this is ongoing, and this is what we did from our perspective as an emergency manager for where our very first disaster, we had 22,000 people without water. And we had nobody in our EOC. It was just myself and two other volunteers that came in to help. Luckily, technology helped us to get that disaster going. But after 3 years of working on the Navajo Nation, we were able to start training people, to over 200 volunteers that we could bring into our Emergency Operations Center to start learning how to sandbag, learning how to run the different sections for an emergency activation. We have an incident action plan where we had planning section chiefs, logistics section chiefs, operations, and finance. And with all of that, we were able to get a lot of our reimbursements quite quickly compared to the usual 8-year time frame. Next slide, please. So one of the key things that we share with everyone is that we still have a lot of our traditions, our language, our culture. And one of the main things that I like to share with people is that when we listen to our elders, when we go back to the old ways of corn, like let's just say corn, for instance, or beans, or some of our traditional foods that we have, knowing how to butcher. My own family, for instance, what we do is my nephew raises chickens, my sisters and my mom are out there with their community garden that they have that helps with our communities in that area. And every time I get a chance, I'll find people that will sell sheep and we will butcher the sheep. We butcher the sheep, we all wear our masks, we all mask up for our sheep butchering, and we'll have no more than 6 people there. And what we will do is we will butcher the sheep, we will split up all the meat, separate it, and send them out to the family members. We have roughly 8 different houses that we need to make sure that they have plenty of food. So that's one thing, an example of what we do. But knowing that, how to butcher a sheep, knowing how to make sure that we have our seeds, we dry the seeds for our gardens, and that we have the water resources that we need to be able to water the plants within the gardens so that it's not wasteful, but also so that we are able to, like you said, get these old ways of doing the community gardens and the old ways of knowing how to butcher the sheep. That is what is getting us through the current pandemic. Making sure that our parents are home, our grandparents are home, our families are home. And what we do is we, as a family, all of us younger generations are within my own family, we are putting together a list that is on, we use Messenger on Facebook. And this group message, what we do is we'll say, okay, every Friday, we're going to go ahead and put together a list, and we're going to put in the list that everybody needs from this household, this household, this household. What do you guys all need? And then from there, we'll pay for it. We'll all pitch in, we'll pay for it. And then one person will go ahead and have it all delivered to that house, one specific house. And then we'll wipe down everything, make sure it's all set, packaged, and ready to go. And then one person will come and they will make sure that they pick it up, and they will make sure that they take it out to all the members, and they'll drop them off at all the different houses so that we reduce the fact that we reduce the number of people going out, we reduce the number of people going out into the stores, we reduce the number of contact that is on the different packages and the different food, and we reduce the fact that we don't have people going out into the stores, we don't have our families going out to the stores. So that's just one example of how we're doing it. And again, like I said, with the butchering, that's another thing that we're doing, is making sure that we have the food, the meat, and the stuff there so that our elders don't have to go and venture out into the cities. One of the things that we also do is within our communities is we put together a tribal teen CERT class. And as we mentioned, what we do is we have to look at ourselves to be able to come together for our own communities. And so what the tribal teen CERT class is that it teaches our students that are all a part of it. It can give them college credit. It can also help with building a lot of their self-esteem issues, if there are self-esteem issues. What we've noticed is that children and students that are more quiet, or that have, how would you say it, where they have self-esteem issues, you give them the opportunity to be able to be involved, and these students become rock stars. They become the leads in helping out in their communities. They're the ones that are helping with sandbagging in their communities. They're the ones that are helping with leading the force and in what needs to be done to be setting up spike camps for wildfires. I mean, man, these kids have just really stepped up. They've just been phenomenal individuals that are now doing great work in like I said, at the Emergency Operations Center, or they're going into emergency management. Right now, they're doing response recovery efforts for just so many different things. I have one student that's doing the COVID response and recovery in the Emergency Operations Center for the state of New Mexico. I have another student that's a wildland firefighter and traveling all over the United States. And I think they did some work up in Canada as well. They've just done phenomenal work. Man, these students have just stepped up and have gone several places to help their communities. And phenomenal kids, phenomenal, great people. Next slide, please. So one of the things that I share is that, and this is where I started. When I first started out as a volunteer firefighter and EMT. And I like sharing this story because when I first started, I remember looking back at my first work before I became a firefighter, before I became an EMT. I remember one of the communities that I lived in, we always had firefighters and EMS units that were coming into the community that I lived in. And I remember looking at them and I remember saying, wow, those people are so smart. Those people are so strong. I could never do that. And looking back at it now, I realized that I needed to rebuild myself because I had made some poor choices back then. And yeah, I'm not one to shy away from making mistakes that I will definitely share other times. If you ask me, I can share those stories. But learning from those mistakes and realizing that you can rebuild yourself, you can do better things in your life. So I returned back home and back to my reservation, and I started volunteering with the Red Cross. I started volunteering with the fire department, became a licensed EMT, became an instructor, and just started learning how to learn more and do more. And all of a sudden, I found myself in school. I found myself with a bachelor's in emergency medical services. I was on the trauma team at University Hospital, the only level 1 trauma center where we had a 44-bed ER. And now here I am working with leading not only one state with all of their COVID response and recovery efforts, but also several here within the lower 48 and within the United States now, where I have calls with Florida and Houston and Philadelphia and all of these different communities and states that are asking for help because they need that expertise to be able to guide them with what are our funding sources, what do we have to consider when we're dealing with tribal communities. Here in the United States, we have roughly 375 tribes. And how do those states work with them? How do we make sure that we don't leave out rural communities, not just only tribal nations, but rural communities as well? And not only that, but how do we pull together all these funding sources for COVID? How do we pull the funding? How do we pull together the pandemic and the vaccine responses for a lot of these different nations and community members? So those are all things that are happening right now where, again, like I said, me being a young lady, I didn't think I could do all of this stuff. And now here I am doing great things with the work that I'm doing for an international Tetra Tech international firm. And pretty excited about it that they listen and they listen to the guidance that I'm presenting to them and giving to them and the choices that they have. Next slide, please. So currently, right now, what I do share with people is that with the COVID response and recovery, most of us in the emergency management field, we know that our disasters are normally anywhere from like a day or two to a couple of weeks, possibly a month or two at the most. I know that wildfires last a long time, monsoonal flooding and impacts long time. And then we also see some of the rising waters that are happening in our communities as well too. And what we normally deal with, and this is what I share with all of our response and recovery people, is that what we normally deal with is a couple of weeks or a couple of days and the documentation to be able to get the reimbursements and the help that we need for federal funding. And this COVID has thrown us completely for a loop where now we're almost at a year. It'll be coming up a year here in a couple of months. We've been dealing with it for 10 months now. And that's a lot to have to ask our first responders. You know, we're tired, we're burnt out, we are exhausted, and we still have to get up and go again. So what we did here in New Mexico is we pulled in our National Guard folks and trained them so that they could be the next people to go out and be able to help out with our vaccination clinics, to help out with our COVID testing sites, and then also teach them in our recovery efforts, like how are we going to do the paperwork. So the guys on the right hand side, the gentleman and the lady on the right hand side, I was working on training them so that they can help with the reimbursement efforts that we needed to be able to show them how to do the paperwork to be able to get federal reimbursement. But again, response and recovery is, it's much longer, it's lasting us much longer than we normally are used to. And so you have a lot of people that have, like I said, the burnout rates. You have a lot of people that are dealing with our community members where our community members are not normally the ones that everybody has to go to for help. Like our little chapter communities right now within the Navajo Nation and with a lot of our counties, they're going directly to these community service coordinators that don't have the type of medical or therapy, counseling expertise to be able to give to their community members, but they're expected to give that. And so, how do you get that information to them? How do you get what the help that they need as well? And right now, what we're doing is we're looking at bringing in backup and training as many people as we can to be able to help out, to be able to be some type of relief to the community members that are currently out there right now.
My name is Claire Burke. I'm actually in Toronto, Canada. So I just wanted to thank Rose for sharing the fact that she came to this later. I actually just finished my master's degree last December. Thank you. So I'm just wondering, when did you come to emergency management?
I would say back in 1994.
The late 1900s, apparently.
Yes, way back.
My son was joking with me about how he's just gone into nursing. He's only 21. And someone else had written in a paper in the late 1900s. Like, that's only 2 decades ago.
I think the main thing is that when I became a first responder, that was back in 1994, and it was interesting because like that is when incident command was a key part of what was needed. And it's like you have to think, and I think it's what makes me a good emergency manager is that I was trained by the firefighters and the different people that were in my life to always, when you're going to respond to an incident, always think of the possibly worst scenario. That way, when you arrive on scene, you're ready to tackle it. Like, okay, it may be a fender bender. It's reported as a fender bender. All right, I'm headed to the scene. What do I need to do? What if it's like a big accident that has like 7 people in one vehicle, a grandma in that other vehicle. And so mentally you're prepared for the worst. And that actually helps me a lot because that helps me with guiding, okay, well, what about this? What about that? What about this? What about these other, like with the COVID, if you're going to get a vaccine, are you sure that we have law enforcement? What if a tire has, what if we have an issue with the tire? What if we don't have enough freezer units? What's going to be our backup? Like that type of stuff. It helps you with being able to always think of possibly, worst case scenario. But as an emergency managers, that's how we should be trained anyway, to think of the worst case scenario. And if we do have that worst case scenario, what are going to be the things that we need to fix? What to make sure that we have what we need for. So, but yeah, 1994 firefighter EMS was when I first started and learning the incident command system. And then when I went off to, I got accepted to medical school, and I went to my 3rd year and just realized it really wasn't what I really liked. Mm-hmm. I appreciate the one-on-one practitioner working with people, but I miss like the big, like, we're going to need firefighters over here. We're going to need the fire department here. We're going to need some triage. We're going to need this, call the EMS unit. We're going to need some of this. We're going to need that, all of that incident command, that adrenaline junkie. I really miss that. That's just something that I think the thing is that when you're an emergency manager, you can thrive in chaos. You can think when literally all heck is breaking loose, and you are able to think through every possible scenario. Okay, we need to do this. We need to do this. We need to do this. Okay, what about this? What about that? What about that? I think that's where we as emergency managers are just, we're critical during that need.
And so that's been like the last 20 years in that field particularly, or?
Yes. So from fire into, like I said, EMS, patient care, and then from there, doing the work that I did for Janet Napolitano at the Homeland Security Emergency Management level, where I was realizing that policy and making sure that the power of the pen was a key part of me deciding to go back into emergency management, because I was realizing that the states had a huge lead with whatever it was, like all the resources. They had like 50 years of Department of Defense funding for their emergency management and their capabilities for their state, for the states. The tribes didn't have anything. We had nothing. Like for a long time, we were forgotten. Like, oh, okay, well, just leave them alone. They have their own thing going. And it's like, no, we need help too. We need money. We need funding. We need help with our communities. And realizing, like I said, the power of the pen and getting funding sources and recognition for our tribal communities was a key part of all of that as well. So back in 2004, that's when I was realizing, again, like I said, with Janet Napolitano's office, the power of the pen, and realizing that policy is a key part of us all being at the table. And what I mean by that is, if we're not at the table, and if we're not, the way that I like to say it is, if we're not at the table, then we're on the menu, meaning to be cut. So we need to be able to make sure that if we are asked for our feedback, we have to do it. Because if we don't do it, somebody else living hundreds of thousands of miles away, they're going to write that policy for us. So if we don't do it, and if we don't say, hey, we have 90% of our roads are dirt roads. Hey, we don't have water. We don't have electricity. We don't have this. If we are not a key part of those conversations happening, then somebody else is going to write it for us. So we have to make sure that we're at the table. We have to make sure that our voices are being heard. If they're not, we're going to keep dealing with the same headache after headache after headache, disaster after disaster after disaster. So we have to be involved.
Thank you.